Greetings, salutations, and welcome to the Kreeger cast. I'm your host, Patrick Kreeger, and today I am joined by Pseudonym.
Hello, everyone. Just one piece of advice. I pronounce it Pseudiom, but you can pronounce it however you want.
Oh, well, okay. That is one of the questions I have for you lined up, but I first would love it if you would introduce your channel to the audience.
All right. It's kind of hard to introduce because my content doesn't have a major idea behind it. I'd say I work with digital history and cultural phenomenon is the best way I can put it.
It's funny because I spent quite a while trying to come up with a good introduction for you, and I desperately wanted to call your channel a history channel, but it's far more than that. You know, it's about cultural impacts and such.
Yeah, I mean, I've always looked at it across lines of like digital history, like I already said, but the fact is like digital history isn't like established like physical history. They're very two different subjects, which I think we can get into later. But my channel isn't really unique in that respect. Like there's others around the internet, like Internet Historian for one thing. He's very I feel like I take a very much weirder subject matter than him, but he's very much one I get compared to a lot. Frederick Knudsen, who does Down the Rabbit Hole, which is a very good series
Mm.
if you want to see bizarre internet things. I've been around the web a very long time, so a lot of that stuff is sort of surface level to me. I don't want to like call anyone like a plebeian or anything like that, but a lot of that subject matter I'm already familiar with because I've sort of drifted around those circles for a very long time.
And, you know, people like Frederick Knudsen do really make good content, although I think your content is just as good.
Oh yeah, I love Down the
Um,
Rabbit Hole, one of my favorite internet series at the moment.
so, okay, let's get into your name. I've been pronouncing it pseudonym now for the last couple weeks, and apparently I've been wrong because I've been trying to figure out why you spelled it the way you do.
Oh, you're not wrong. You can interpret it however you like. That's the whole point of it.
Oh, I just thought it was fascinating because everyone on the internet seems to put on a face more or less. I've tried not to do that, but I thought it was really cool that yours was just pseudonym. But could you pronounce it again for me?
I pronounce it like I agree that I think you can also pronounce it pseudium, but I pronounce or pseudonym. I pronounce it pseudium as in IOM.
And so, why did you choose that name? Like, if you could go into a little more detail on that.
Well, so here's a little background on my channel that I think literally no one knows because it had no subscribers at that point. If you go to my channel page and look at when it was created, it was created in 2016, but I didn't start uploading videos until 2017, 2018. I would have to go back and check. It's right on the fringe, I think. In the early days, when there was no video content, it had a completely different name, which was Mythiopia, which means myth making. And I was going to talk about completely different subject matter back then, but I sort of held off on uploading any content for a while. And eventually I came across George Shalamanazar, which is my first video, which is very bad. Please do not go and watch it. It's rambling and cumbersome and way too long.
It's funny because I literally just listened to that video in preparation for this, and I found it to be one of my favorite things you've done. But I love long, rambly things.
Oh, yeah, I do too. It's just when I look back, I feel like it doesn't like the subject matter fits. It's just I feel the style I used because that was like my first sort of test production, I guess you could say. The style I took for it is very like sticks and bones or very sparse, you could say. It feels more like a slideshow than an actual video.
You know, I think I did get the vibe of like a standard History Channel documentary from it, but I liked that.
Oh yeah, I'm not trying to like sandbag anyone or anything like that. It's just I feel like it's not represented. I want to go back at some point and remake it because I feel like I can do Shalmaneser as a character a lot better job representing him.
You do have a completely different style nowadays, but it is hard pinning your style down.
Yeah, I'd definitely agree. So the issue is that well, let's move back to this my style because what do you think my style is? Because I could not give you an answer.
Well, if I had to say, and please don't take this as an insult because I really do mean it as a positive thing, it's like a more competent history related game theory.
At least that's the way it feels to me.
I love that description. I think I'll put that if I ever get anything published anywhere. I'll put Kreeger cast raves more competent version of game theory.
Well, yeah. I feel like they're pandering to the lowest common denominator some of the time, and you don't seem to do that in the slightest. But your editing is quippy. It's fast. It's concise and tight, and I don't know. I like it.
Oh no, thank you. I feel like with the video editing, people adopt. They sort of have to play to their strengths and weaknesses. Like personally, I'm not a very funny person, I feel like. So a lot of the work has to rely on the video being more informative. I mean, there's jokes here and there, but comedy is not my strong suit.
Nor mine. But your visuals are incredibly good, particularly your Caesar video. The way things morph and change, and looks like that took a lot of work.
Oh, it did. The Caesar video was actually, at least I think, one of the funnest to research because the name itself has such a wide impact. I think the fact about the Caesar salad is the most interesting thing in the entire video, not to be too uh, lowest common denominator, but
No, that's really. I don't think most people realize that that it's not actually named after Caesar, but a different Caesar. Sadly, that was one of the factoids I knew going into it. I do have a question on that video. My friends and I had a debate for a little while about who was the last, between the Kaiser and the Tsar, and I have to admit I was completely wrong. I really did think that the Kaiser held his title a little longer than the Tsar did.
well, I think technically the Kaiser won in the end because he was the one left alive.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Did you ever see Mark Felton's videos on what happened to the Kaiser after the war?
No, I've come across some of it in my research, but I've never really delved into it. I know, like, after he was forced to abdicate and whatnot, he sort of, like all monarchs, sort of vanished, but I really haven't kept up with, like, the German. I mean, the German royal family still exists, correct? It's just not, like, official.
Mm-hmm.
I know for a fact, like, the Bonapartes still exist, and there's still, like, several other lines that can claim the French throne. I find, like, monarchy things like that very interesting. And the fact that, there's some German house who are the descendants of the Catholic claimants to the throne of England.
When I was in Bavaria a number of years back, uh, I went to a what do you call it, a medieval fair, and they actually had the current Prince of Bavaria come out and do a horse riding competition thing. So they do keep track of it.
Uh, I guess you do even today. Well, it's a very interesting claim, but I don't know if like how long that'll stick around nowadays. Like obviously politics aren't like predictable, but I don't know for how long like royal families as like a national claim or something like that will be relevant, if you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I've actually wondered that for a while about the Queen. She still seems to hold a lot of power, and I mean the Queen of England, but she doesn't really use it.
No, she doesn't. I mean, obviously there's like actual monarchies still left out there, like in the Middle East, and like I believe some not Nepal, Bhutan, I believe has an actual like monarch who rules. Um, Japanese emperor I know is basically just a figurehead in all respects after World War II. The Saudis, they're a whole different basket case.
And then there's even like pseudo royal families like the like Kim Jong Un and such.
Oh yeah, definitely. Um, Obviously that's more like I agree with you. That's like a pseudo royal family, but I I don't know. It's just it's very odd because I don't like to say history is pointing towards one direction. And honestly, like maybe there'll be a real rebirth of like interest in like national royal families and whatnot. But like there's sort of more celebrities nowadays. I don't know. It's a very odd thing. Like being an American, I can't really relate, unfortunately.
So I want to get to your research style. That's one of the things I adore about your videos is I try to pick YouTubers that will teach me about topics that I don't know about. And you delve into a wide variety of topics from the ancient to the modern. And how do you go about your research?
Uh, the research for my channel differs depending definitely on the subject matter. Um, Internet history is quicker to produce because of the fact there's far less sources and a lot of it is far smaller. Um, I do more enjoy producing actual like historical content though. The only issue is that I prefer to produce like substantial videos, which means I have to go back through archives and what not actual archives, but like archive.org is a very good resource where you can find uh, books whose copyrights have expired a long time ago, and like the subject matter I deal with is sort of like things that don't really show up a lot in the modern era. So I need things from like the late 1800s to early 1900s, where sort of these historical like fads sort of move in and out. With my Hero Stratus video, for example, uh, in the mid 1800s, there was a very big revival of interest with him, at least as like sort of a literary figure. Um, my Charles of Sweden video also, well, he's sort of like contemporary now because like sort of he's a sort of a Swedish metal icon, which is very bizarre. But there's sort of been a rebirth of interest in him. But my main source of information there, because I was more interested in his character than an actual like historical study, was Voltaire's biography on him, which I would very much recommend if you're interested in history. Read. It's a very not like amazing historical document, but it's a very interesting like character study. The way he plays the Tsar Peter off Charles of Sweden.
And that's actually one of the things about your videos is that it's more than just a statement of fact in a interesting way. You really do talk about the culture and how these facts impacted the world around them.
Uh, yeah, with history, I feel like um, it obviously depends on what like subfield you're taking or where on the internet you're looking, but there's always been very much of a push to sort of divorce any form of history from like cultural history or cultural influence, which I feel like is a very bad idea. Personally, I'm very interested in the sort of way that uh, literature and culture and things like that, music and whatnot, how they interact with history itself. Like you can see that in my Vorther Media video. The meeting of Napoleon and Goethe is a very interesting like historical topic. Like Goethe was basically the first like worldwide celebrity as we understand it, and then you have Napoleon conquering Europe, and he calls on Goethe as a celebrity and says, it's not really in my video, but he calls on him and says, "You shall represent." Basically, he says, "You shall represent the German people as their sort of mastermind or their genius." Goethe sort of had a heavy disagreement with that because of how he understood like the German people or the German nation, which wasn't really a nation at that point, of course. But it's very interesting because then, obviously, with Goethe, there's this sort of trickle down through all of German literature, and obviously there's a good and a bad side. Like his sort of classicalism and sort of interest in like Rome and whatnot had a very heavy effect on German history. But then you sort of get, of course, with Germany, there's always the bad elements around 1930s, 1940s that sort of look back in history and go like, "Huh, this is very interesting."
Yeah, they did have the tendency of digging up old things and reappropriating them or recontextualizing them.
Yeah, and obviously that's like even a problem today. Like for I prefer not to judge things in like moral goods or moral bads, but obviously like people can abuse recontextualization and whatnot, especially with like simple things like with internet history. There's always that struggle about how people understand things in context, and my videos are very interested like not in trying to moralize things to people. They're more interested in like the context. I always saw them as like you shouldn't take mine as like the measure of the thing or believe like I have all the information. My videos are always interested in trying to like get people like try to get them to go out there and research things themselves or like try to pull up some kind of historical interest from them.
And as I was saying before, that's what I like about channels like yours is I can subscribe to them and then get things brought up that I would have never noticed on my own and then dive into them a little bit.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you did that, and I'm very glad I get to come on my podcast and like talk to someone or your podcast, sorry, someone's podcast who like watches my videos because I'm always interested in like seeing how people interpret them. I don't really have a judgment or like anything like that. Like I'm not going to say you should interpret this way. I just want to see what people think because I like to see how people interact with culture and history, which my videos are about.
Well, there is another video of yours that I would actually like to talk about for a moment. I think it was the important videos playlist.
Oh yes, that's one of my. It's a very the video itself is not controversial, but the subject matter is a very storied and controversial item.
How so?
Um, well, the playlist itself, like it has a very long history because it was the work of El Jolto. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong because someone said it's supposed to be pronounced in Spanish because it's some kind of Spanish word. I'm not entirely sure which. Um, but the playlist, like in my video, it was deleted. But even before that, like it has copyrighted material in it, so videos have a habit of going down or people pull them down because they don't like the video. So it's very much always in flux what's going to be there when you watch it or when someone else watches it. Recently, Greg Master, who produced or I shouldn't say produced, he collected all the videos and put them in like a 3-hour feature-length video and uploaded it on YouTube. He reached out and contacted me and said like, his video's gone. Someone pulled it down, and someone pulled out all the mirrors or like other copies of it. So the recreation of the playlist, the original playlist was also deleted too, is also still up. So like you can still watch it with most of the videos, but trying to access it is always a trouble because you're not always sure if it's going to be there or it's going to be like there in whole.
Do you mind going into a moment about digital rights? Because I have a couple questions and opinions on this topic.
Sure, go ahead. I love to hear them. I know that's always a pertinent issue when you're dealing with YouTube.
Yeah, I have this belief that it is important for people to archive this stuff because it just gets taken down. And I know that technically that's not kosher.
Technically, but when you're on the internet, sometimes you gotta wave the Jolly Roger and take out the cutlass and start speaking with a bit of an accent.
I've always held the belief that you should archive whatever you think is important to you, but not not putting it back up until an original has been taken down.
I think that's a good stance to have on it, but I feel like when you introduce like copyrighted footage or other things like that, it becomes incredibly more complicated because I, as someone who uploads things to YouTube, obviously believes in a heavy amount of fair use and whatnot. The issue is though is that is what I'm doing transformative? I'd say it is, but I understand there's an argument where people say this content is not transformative. You're only repeating someone else's work, which I don't think is true because I recontextualize the content I'm using.
Well, that's one of the big things about history in general is that you can't copyright or trademark or patent facts, but you can stories and the way they're told.
Yeah, that's the issue. And I mean, on your last episode, Potential History, I've never watched any of his videos, but he had some controversy where some guy from like, what was it, Germany was claiming he had rights to like some historical story from World War II or something like that. I mean, obviously, I don't want to get into it too much because you talked it over with him, but I feel like if anyone's interested, they should definitely go back and watch that because he had a very interesting story that relates to what you're talking about.
And that's kind of what got me onto this is I had no idea that this sort of thing was possible until he brought it up.
Oh no, I didn't know either, and I didn't I didn't get angry, but it definitely like it's sort of unnerving if you understand what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. That's what I meant about it. I don't like the concept that people are starting to push into copywriting facts.
Yeah, that's definitely like when you're dealing with history as a subject field, like you're placing down a lot of mines you're going to have to deal with in the future. Like obviously I believe like a creator has rights to their intellectual property for some amount of time, like the United States copyright law. Everyone goes over this, so I don't want to beat a dead horse, but like it's atrocious at the moment. But when you are taking that sort of like theory and applying it to history, it becomes like it goes from annoying to like incredibly dangerous.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what's weird is that this topic has been covered in the past. It was a fiasco with things like dictionaries and encyclopedias and maps. John Green's book Paper Towns is even based off of that concept. You can't copyright a fact, but you can make like a fake map with, like one or two fake roads on it, and then that's an original work of art, and you can copyright that.
Yeah, and that even goes into like the relationship between like fiction and reality, which is like a very interesting topic that I've sort of approached on my channel. Definitely with Shalmanazar, I've approached that subject where history and like fantasy eventually like bleed into each other. So there's going to be some exchange, but how exactly you cordon off those two things is like very, very obtuse, and there's like no one who really has sort of addressed it yet.
Indeed. I do want to go back to this important videos playlist. Now, I can kind of see the reasons already, but why didn't you choose the playlist? I instantly regret clicking on this.
In all honesty, I had never seen that playlist before. Uh, I before that video and people commented, I didn't know the instant regret playlist was a thing. I don't even know where I heard about the important videos playlist. Uh, Probably from social media or somewhere. Um, I still haven't watched the instant regret playlist. I'm interested in doing something on it eventually, but when you have something that has the title, "You will instantly regret clicking this," I kind of want to push that off for a little bit.
I can see the hesitation there, but it is very similar to important videos, but it's a lot longer.
Oh yeah, I checked it out. It has like 500 videos, and even then, the important videos playlist had 312. So that's like half the workload added again. So obviously, it'll take a little bit more time. I deal mostly like how I go about making videos is I deal with things I'm interested in. So sometimes there'll be links between things, sometimes there won't. But I have a document with like 300 ideas or something on it of video ideas. The instant regret playlist is on that. I don't know when I'll get to it. I don't know when I'll get to any video. I'm working on like four right now, and I don't know when any of them will be done.
Thus is the curse of the YouTuber.
Yeah, that's the issue with like this. Like, I am good with time management. The issue is when you're dealing with things like this, like um, some of the videos I'm working on right now is I have to reach out to people, and with the subject matter I deal with, those people may not even exist anymore, so they're very hard to track down.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So I want to ask now, what got you into making YouTube videos? What inspired this?
So I wrote down stuff on a card here, so I remember. So my channel, I think I kind of already alluded to it. Sort of, I was originally going to talk about fantasy literature on my channel, interested enough in like fiction and world building back in like 2016. I've noticed since then a lot of channels have cropped up who do that exact same thing. They didn't Their existence didn't stop me from doing that. I just never got around to it until like 2018 when I came across Shalmanazar, and I tried looking for him on the internet, and like he has a Wikipedia article, but it's not very good. It's okay, but going back and reading like his stuff, it's very long and there's a lot of information, and someone just kind of cobbled it together. So I was very interested in doing a more precise job. I'm not going to go around and edit Wikipedia because I don't know what Wikipedia's standards are, and I'm not going to mess with that. But with Shalmanazar, the video is sort of 32 or 33 minutes. I would have to go back and look at it, but it's that long because I wanted to sort of share his story because it was a very bizarre one, and it's sort of everything sort of just flowed from there. Me talking about Shalmanazar himself actually comes from, or the idea of talking about in like a video. The Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges wrote a collection of short stories called A Universal History of Infamy, which talks about like similar con artists and like thief-like figures, which sort of got me interested in that sort of like more taboo or darker side of history. Um, from there, I sort of took it on my own. I don't know when Frederick Knudsen started uploading videos, but I hadn't discovered him at that point. So like people can draw comparisons between that video and like his videos, but I wasn't aware of his channel at that point. So maybe I just grabbed something from the like ether and it sort of like resulted in a similar subject matter or like presentation. And then after that, I was like, this video's okay, but I sort of want to talk about more bizarre or interesting things. That led me on to the Caspar David Friedrich video, which is I've produced a lot of videos on German stuff randomly. I don't really particularly have an interest in Germany. It's just sort of fallen out like that. Um, that was the third video I produced. The Japonisme video was actually the second video I produced. So those were released in a switched around order, I believe. The the Caspar David Frederick video was released later because I had so many problems producing that video. If you go back and watch it, I think it's worse than my first video, in all honesty. I edited it in the wrong dimensions for some reason. All the information was very hard to find, so I had to rely on like art books published from the New York Met Gallery or something like that, which isn't a bad history source, but it's just a very not a good one if you want to access things in like historical context. And then the audio quality is really bad because my mic was acting up that day. So everything just went wrong with that video.
Well, I have to say, I don't think any of your videos are bad. I just want to make that very clear. But I do actually have to ask the question. Have you deleted a video because you thought it was no longer up to your current standards?
No. All right. So I've never said anything about this, but I promise, I swear to God, and I hope so, I will never delete a video on my channel. Obviously, if something gets copyrighted takedown or something happens, that's different. But I don't want to ever delete a video on my channel because I feel like if someone wants to see my growth as a creator, they can look at all my videos and see what's happened. But personally, I feel like if I ever deleted anything, I feel like I'm cowarding out, if you get what I'm trying to say.
No, absolutely. It's a debate I'm currently going through. I've heard the two sides of the argument. One, that you don't want someone stumbling across what you don't consider your quality of work anymore, as their first impression of you. And then the other is exactly what you just said.
Yeah, and I fall on more the side of I don't want to, obviously, I sort of keep a line between who I am as a person and my channel, because my channel isn't about my personality, because I think as a person I'm pretty bland, in all honesty. But my channel needs to exist in a whole so people can understand what the channel is about. So even if a video gets 25 views, I'll keep it up there just so people can see what I tried and failed at.
Like I said, I think it has more to do with the algorithm or some such than the quality of your video.
Oh no, I agree there. I've debated deleting videos. The ancient weather video, I feel like it's just a very odd video. I don't think it's bad or anything like that. It's a history of meteorology, so it's a very niche subject matter. It's not that I don't like it. It's just that I have a very odd relationship to that video where it sort of annoys me for some reason, and it's sort of just I can't put a reason behind why it does. It just does.
I actually completely get you there. So I do have one more question to ask you in this vein, and then we'll get on to our topic for the video. What started your passion in history?
That's a good question because I sort of asked that myself. I can't really pinpoint to anything. When I was very little, I think I had a very big book on ancient myths, or maybe it was Greek history or something. I can't remember. And it was always on the bookshelf in our living room. And I always used to look at it, even before I could read, just to look at the pictures. And I can't remember what it was, but there was this one thing, and I think it was about Plato and him creating the myth of Atlantis, or him and Atlantis. And it was a very old, I think it was a map or something. And I just was sort of entranced with it because it was very it was a sort of decayed thing, and it had lines written all over it. And for the life of me, I think I always wanted to understand it, but I never could. And eventually when I went back and reread through the book, the explanation for what it was very pedestrian. This is the oldest copy of the myth of Atlantis in existence or something like that.
Well, it is amazing how the books on your bookshelf as a child can really impact who you are.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Currently, I'm sort of looking back through all the books and because I had to reorganize because I have a lot of books, obviously, because of the research I have to do, and I'm sure you do too, because it sounds like you're You're a very erudite guy, if I may say that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So when you go back and through and you're like, and you look at your like childhood books, it's like, did I learn anything from this? Did I even read this? But I think everyone in a way does have like an influence on you. Um, I don't really believe in the argument that like media defines who you are as a person. I kind of agree with it in a sort of way. And obviously, like that's an argument people have had for a long time. But I do think media, like, it shapes the sort of way you go about sort of sorry, I repeat myself here, but it goes about the way you sort of grapple with the world and understand ideas. But I think that's like a very basic idea, and I'm sort of just preaching to the choir or something.
No, absolutely. Though I was thinking of it more as not that the media would shape you, but the media opens your eyes to certain venues that you haven't been exposed to before. You know, if you have a box set of dinosaur books on your shelf, or watched a few dinosaur documentaries, you'd probably have had a passion in paleontology and seen if that was for you or not.
That's another thing. Like, is it just me, or is like every kid obsessed with dinosaurs at some point?
I don't think I've ever met a boy that wasn't infatuated with dinosaurs at some point, and I'd say at least half the girls too.
Yeah, that's a very universal thing, and I don't really know why. Maybe it's because like humans like to think about big, big things that roam the earth or something like that. Uh, Maybe it's just like every human has a natural interest in history, or maybe it's like it like ticks something in like our primeval brain, like woolly mammoths and whatnot, which we used to hunt. So we go searching for like giant beasts that don't exist anymore.
I've always kind of looked at it as kind of like the dodo or the passenger pigeon or whatever. It's something that is a myth as far as, the people living today know, but was real and it's almost touchable. The Tyrannosaurus rexes are just as impressive as a unicorn.
Yeah, I definitely. I think that's. I think I'd agree with that. Well, obviously, like as I was saying, like woolly mammoths existed contemporary with humans for quite a while, even to like what was it like 300 BC? They still existed, like but very very distantly, like they were isolated in Greenland or something like that.
The numbers I've heard is roughly 4,000 years ago, the last populations outside of an island off the coast of Siberia and actually an island off the coast of California both had populations of pygmy mammoths.
Okay, well, that's not my subject matter, so I'm obviously going to be very bad in it. Thank you for telling me that.
I live next to one of those islands, and the pygmy mammoths are a big deal to us.
Well, you got to have a local animal, so I think a pygmy mammoth is a pretty good local animal.
Yeah, they're kind of weird because they have like almost normally sized heads, but just very small bodies.
You said in your podcast with Potential History, you watched Trey the Explainer, right?
Yes, I adore his channel.
Oh yeah, he's very good too. Like, if anyone wants to know more about this stuff, like I feel like he's the YouTube expert you want to go watch on it.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like I did him a great disservice, and I guess now I have the opportunity to fix that. I described him as the guy that debunks ancient aliens and ancient dinosaurs, like contemporary with man. He's so much more than that.
Oh yeah, he's very, very good. I love the stuff he tackles. His Nephilim,
Mm-hmm.
that video is very interesting. Like, I've always been interested in like mythological interpretation, especially as it relates to like the Bible and whatnot. But that's like on the amount of reading that guy does is on a next level, I gotta say.
Well, that was one of the things that I was trying to talk with you about when it comes to the research is, I have a hard time sitting down and reading a book. So I listen to almost everything as an audiobook. It's one of the reasons why I like educational YouTubers too, because, it's kind of a great way to wet your feet to decide whether or not you want to go into an audiobook. But I noticed that a lot of people have I'm looking for a word, great disdain for audiobook listeners.
Well, I can see why you started this podcast here then as an audiobook listener. Um, I think it depends on the type of person. Like everyone interprets information differently. So I think audiobooks work more for some people and text works more for other people. Um, when you're tackling like a very big subject matter, I think audiobooks are okay, but I would always in the end up on the side of text. Not that I'm trying to discourage people from using audiobooks. Like if you're in a car or waiting or anything like that, I feel like audiobooks are far better to use than text books.
That's part of the problem is I spend an abnormal amount of my life in a car. I drive something like 40 or 50,000 miles a year minimum, sometimes as much as 200,000.
Oh no, you sound like a very busy guy, so I assumed you had to have some way to sort of get that information without crashing your car into a rut on the side of the road while trying to swerve out of the front of a 18-wheeler or something like that.
Exactly, exactly. But I do agree with you that there really is no substitution for a hardcover book that you're actually looking at, particularly when it pertains with graphs and tables and charts. But I just feel like I need to plug that audiobooks are, a good way to start.
Oh no, they're an amazing way to start. I cannot, besides like fiction, for some reason, like audiobooks with like historical or scientific information have never clicked with my brain, so I can't use them. If I want to listen to like a book on tape or CD, whatever it is nowadays, I just use the internet. Uh, like that's fine for me, but it just doesn't connect with my brain. So, like I said, I think it depends heavily on the person. So you have to go out there and discover it yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's probably the best thing is to get people to, if they have an interest, try many different ways of learning it, and eventually you'll find something that you enjoy.
Yeah, and that's kind of what like I think we already went over it, but that's sort of like what my channel and I hope a lot of other people's channels are about. Like, uh, it's always going to be on you to go out there and learn something. Like, this is a good start, and I try to provide, and I hope everyone else tries to provide the most accurate information possible, and with the least amount of biases. But you're always going to have some bias, no matter which way you approach something. But it always depends on you that if you want this information, you have to go out there.
Absolutely. And even if the creator has 100% the correct information and portrays it in 100% the correct manner, it doesn't mean that that information won't change with time.
No. So here's an interesting fact. The internet stuff I have to deal with is the issue is that information on the internet is very, very ephemeral and it can be destroyed or hidden very, very easily.
Absolutely.
So when you approach something, especially with like if you want to know something about the internet, always take into measure your sources and who you're getting this information from. Obviously, that's like a basic uh, research literary thing. Like you have to understand what you're looking for and who you're getting it from and where to access this. But with the internet, especially with like smaller things, information is often one-sided. I try to deal with that by trying to give it the most neutral possible glance. But when you're dealing with like internet information, that's always going to be like that. You can't really change that. Hope for the best that people come out of the woodwork and like tell you if you got something wrong or offer their own side of the story, which I'm very glad at because the reason I sort of make my internet videos is if I find something and I can only find basic outlines, I hope that putting information out there will attract people and they'll give their own stories on it.
Speaking of that exactly, I've been going around asking people about the Super S. And I have it confirmed that neither my mother nor my father ever heard about it until your video. So that would have been an American growing up in the 1950s and a German growing up in the 1940s.
Okay, so I have some interesting information about this. So, what is the earliest you found, or do you think that this the Super S or Cool S, whatever you want to call it, when do you think it first emerged?
So, based on your video, I would imagine that the style that we know now probably developed, I'm going to say in the 60s, if not a little later. But, you made the argument that it does go back a little bit further. That being said, I can't find any independently that goes back much past the 90s, maybe even early 80s. But that's from anecdotes.
Okay, so here's where we're going to delve into what I call the Super S controversy. So far, I've noticed there's two, technically three camps, but we're going to ignore the third camp because they claim it's an 8 And let me tell you, people, you're obviously wrong if you think it's an 8. So there's one side who thinks this is an S. The other side, which I hadn't even thought about, and they have a good point. Well, I sort of covered it in my video, sort of, but the other side says this is a naturally occurring pattern that humans will automatically make because it's so like simple to make, and like it's obviously, if you flip it on its side, it resembles an infinity symbol. So when you're dealing with like trying to figure out the earliest date, the issue is how you approach it. So is it an S or is it like a loop, like a symbol? Obviously, it resembles like a Celtic knot or something like that. So that sort of pattern work. You can sort of see it if you look up like Scottish or Irish sweaters or something like that. A lot of them have like the similar pattern of like the two things like interlooping, basically. Someone, I don't have his name right now, unfortunately. Someone linked me to a documentary, very, very bizarre documentary, because it's the last place you would think this would come from, but it is a documentary about the Smiths, who I believe were a punk band from the 1970s. And they pointed out, if you look on the stage at a certain time, the S is there, but it's not a symbol. It's the pattern in the wall resembles the S's like loop. So it looks like a chain. But then, if we want to go even further back, someone, I don't know if they want me to mention their name, someone, the first name is Tyler. If they listen to this, I'm sure they know who they are, emailed me a very interesting photograph. Sorry, I'm just going to click here to make sure I can pull this up. It is from a painting by Hans Hoberlin the Younger from when date is it? From 1533. And if you look on the table on the left diplomat, by his hand looks to be on its side, so it resembles an infinity symbol. It looks to be an S. And this is from 1533 in a painting by a Dutch painter.
Wow. Oh, so it does go back a lot further than you even were pointing at in your video. At least confirmed.
Yeah, so that basically confirms that the symbol, at least, is as far back as the 1500s. Whether or not you would call it an S sort of depends on how you interpret it, I guess you could say. Someone in my comments, I don't know if they ever provided proof because I've been busy, so I've been able to check my comments. They said their grandfather, who I believe is from Croatia, had it, the S as like a symbol engraved on their handgun from World War II, I believe they said. They may have provided proof. I don't know. All they had was a claim. So as an S, I think that would put it at least back to the 1910s, which would actually be interesting because it would then be older than the Kilroy Was Here graffiti.
You know, I'm going to go back through some archive photos I have, because now that you say that, I think I have seen it on rifle butts before.
That would be very interesting because my argument, and I could be wrong, I could be 100% wrong. My argument is that it's a purely like English or like Anglo symbol. So if it can be proven that it didn't get to like Eastern Europe until the 1910s, then I think that would prove that it probably is an English symbol, because then it would be the troops carrying the symbol to like the majority of Europe from like England or like the colonies, I guess you could say. I could be 100% wrong on that, though.
I'll delve into it and get back to you in a week or so with what I found. Symbols on weaponry are a big deal to me because I collect old bayonets and whatnot, and you always got to know what you're buying, you know.
Oh no, 100%. I mean, so obviously, like, I'm not a very big like World Wars guy. I know some information just as like a amateur historian, but so what are the reoccurring symbols on like things you've seen from that period?
Well, the ones that I find fascinating, because I don't quite understand why they keep showing up, is just M's. That don't necessarily mean a word that starts with an M. It's universal across everyone. Americans, Germans, Russians, Japanese. There's little M markings.
It's very interesting. Well, obviously, when you get into this argument, I feel like it kind of comes down to whether or not you believe like there's a collective consciousness, I guess you could say, that humanity like derives symbols from, if that's just like our ancestral memory, if you believe like we have something like that. Like, are we all accessing symbols from the same point, or are they all coming from somewhere else?
Yeah. There's one that actually my friends and I have been delving into rather recently. The concept of, have you seen a modern German military parade by chance?
Yes.
Okay. So you might have noticed that they carry this stick with a bunch of bells on it.
Mm.
And the history of that instrument is ridiculous because just about everyone claims they invented it. But it does come from a unique source. It's very, Ottoman Empire. It has something to do with how the Ottomans interacted with Mongolian groups, and they created this instrument. And then it got spread all throughout Europe. And from time to time, groups would forget they had it and then would say, oh, yeah, we got that from the French. Or, as the Germans say, they got that from the Austrians, you know?
That's interesting because the second you like described it as like a stick with bells, I thought about the Mongols. I know as a flag they used to use like a horsehair banner. So I was wondering if that may be a possible origin for it.
It is. It is.
That is the origin?
It's part of the origin. Yeah, it really is this combination of Turkish and, or I guess, Ottoman and Mongol histories working together. And then even the Europeans put their own twists on it and start like putting the Roman eagle on top of it.
That's interesting because, yeah, that's the sort of history I love to talk about, just like how other cultures have interacted with each other. Obviously, like a lot of my videos, mainly I talk about it like through artwork and like Vincent Van Gogh and like the influence on like the Japanese of him is one of the largest examples. But like it's very interesting because even through something like that, like an instrument, like everyone claims they invented it, but it's more a product of like cultural exchange than it is of any one people.
Exactly. And it's fascinating the way that it's used to this day. But this kind of gets us towards our topic of the video, which we're almost an hour into, the oldest meme. Now, I'm confident that I think I know what it could be, but why don't you start us off? And how about with what you have as a definition for what a meme is?
Okay, so there's the issue of where I don't really have a definite thing because when one approaches like memetics or something like that, they're gonna all enter the field with like a different assumption of what a meme is. Is a meme a joke like we understand it right now? Like it's a joke that's transmitted from person to person? Or like is it more in the original context where it's a sort of invasive idea or symbol or something that's transmitted from person to person until it's reproduced across all of humanity? Um, Obviously, there's pretty old ones that I know of, at least. The oldest one that we can consider like a meme in the modern sense, I guess you could say, is the three hairs like symbolism, where there's a few articles on this where there's through Europe and like the Middle East and maybe into China, there's a symbol of like three hairs running in a circle and their ears are sort of abutting one another. And that symbol reappears again and again across many cultural fields for some reason. But then you could even go into a deeper like comprehension that like is a symbol itself a meme because it's reproduced again and again. So you could then argue that like would religious symbolism be considered a meme? Obviously, I'm not going to say like there is no God or anything like that, but the way humanity interacts with religion, like the way we represent things or like the abstract is very much like a concept that is sort of memetics sort of defines. So definitely like the representation of like Christianity through the cross, I consider a sort of meme in itself. I don't mean it like deri- I don't mean any insult when I say that. I just mean like it's one of the most efficient like symbols I feel like that's existed throughout history where the second you see a cross, you understand what this represents.
And that's actually what I would consider my definition of a meme, which is a phrase or photo or image that conveys a meaning.
Yeah, I would uh I feel like I'd agree with you, but I always have to keep my position open for new information because of just the way I handle things. So I'm not like disagreeing with you, but I'd say that's probably the best definition, or at least that's probably the definition we should operate off here since it's your show.
That's fine. I really do think that the best thing is to have a clear definition between two people, and so that if the arguments get taken out of context, they have their context.
Yeah, exactly. That goes into like a whole nother thing with like internet arguments and whatnot, which I don't really want to touch on right now, and I prefer just to not touch on in general. But uh, let's go with that.
I didn't even tell you this before you came on because of the way you conduct yourself on your channel. But I do have 3 rules on this podcast, which is try to keep swearing to a minimum. Don't badmouth anyone. That's so people's feelings don't get hurt, and don't bring up politics. And I would include in politics controversies online.
Yeah. So I feel like I think we've stuck to that pretty good. I mean, we've butted up against it, but that's natural. But I feel like we've kept things clean into the rules. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. But like I said, the way you conduct yourself on your channel is exactly why I didn't feel I needed to say that. But, so do you have a couple things that you might argue in addition to the 3 hairs?
Obviously, like I said, like any form of religious symbolism, I feel like to some degree is a meme, in which your sort of definition where it's like it's an image or symbolism that represents an idea. Um, there's some other things I know of. Technically, if you wanted to get complicated, you could claim pants themselves are a meme since the Romans understood them as being representations of the barbarians. Obviously, pants are pretty universal nowadays, so we don't tackle it like that. But if you wanted to get funny about it, you could say that.
And see, this is exactly what I was hoping would come out of this conversation is I've had just about everyone I've talked to about this say the exact same thing once they've given it some thought, and that was not the same thing I've heard over and over again.
Well, what's the common answer? I want to know.
Vini Vini Vici.
Really?
Yeah. Which I find fascinating because if you really wanted to just use a phrase like that, you could go back to the Melian dialogues. You could go back further, but people seem to think that that's one of the most universally understood phrases. And by the way, yes, I do know that I may be mispronouncing it because there's new theories, but I think the current pronunciation they're going with is Winnie Winnie Weetzie, and I don't like that.
I don't know, man. Ancient linguistics are like such a mess.
So, how do you feel about that?
Uh, I don't. I feel like that's a very. I do agree. Yes, it could be considered one, but the issue is it universal enough? Because I feel like because this is the issue you run into when you talk about stuff like that. You're approaching something from like a Western perspective or like a European or an American perspective. So something could be universal across like your cultural sphere, and it can be non-existent in another cultural sphere. Like if I pulled someone off the street in like I don't know Shanghai or like Taiwan or any place like that in the East, China, Japan, anywhere, even India. India is kind of different though because obviously you have the heavy like English influence in that country. But would they understand what Vidi Vidi Vici means? Would they understand it? Very possibly yes, because of, like cultural exchange. Most people in Europe would understand it, but even then, you could find people I feel like who wouldn't understand it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I find it fascinating that this cutoff seems to be the Roman Empire. Even if you're going to go with something like the cross, that kind of, cuts off around there too. I guess you could say the Star of David goes back further, but I actually don't know.
Oh, actually, it doesn't, I believe. Um, it's existed for a symbol for a long time, but it's like association with like mainstream Judaism, I believe, only dates back to like the 1500s, I believe, because like I believe the Christians in the 1300s wanted like a symbol to represent the Jews across Europe or something like that. I could be entirely wrong, and this could be like just a madman's ramblings, but I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that old. Well, it's old, but like its association is not that old.
I was kind of under the impression too that it was just about the same age as the cross, if not a little bit younger. But again, like you said, I'm uneducated on this topic.
Oh, I am too. No one listen to what I say, please God. I was going to point out, like, interesting enough, like you said, a lot of the stuff, the Roman Empire is the cutoff date, which is very interesting. So, is that because modern Western thought all derives from the Roman Empire, so we're all reaching back to the same source, or is it because the Roman Empire was the only like universal enough state to spread like these symbols and ideas?
Well, that was one of the things, is that they really did try to spread their culture. The Greeks did too, for to a lesser extent, but I don't know. I just find it really weird. You would think that most of them would come from the Greeks, considering how much the Romans did base off the Greeks as well.
Yeah, you would think so too, but I mean, I guess the argument can be made is that because I know the Romans, at least with religion, they wanted to sort of enculture other peoples into their faith, so they accepted other religions to a degree. So they sort of modified them and said, "Our gods are also your gods, or your gods exist in our pantheon." Um, with Greece, I'm not so sure. I mean, Alexander obviously
Mm.
made efforts, but even then, he sort of came under. I know at the end of his life, he came under like very heavy Persian influence. I know that.
We're gonna come right back to this because I do have an argument for the oldest meme. But since you brought him up, that's another interesting name that seems to echo through history. Alexander.
It is. I sort of, I kind of tangentially touched on it, I think, in the Caesar video, very tangentially, but I feel like Alexander's maybe the most, like, the oldest name we can hear nowadays, if you consider like its evolution from like Alexandros or even like older forms. Is that the oldest name like anyone will go by nowadays? Obviously, you have like people, especially in like Spanish or Hispanic countries, you have like people going by Jesus, so Jesus, and then even Mohammed in Arabic and Islamic countries, and even like India, Indonesia, other places like that. So those are two older names, but even then, like Alexandros still like blows them out of the water by like 600 years, 300 years.
And the way it's evolved over the years, there are so many different variations. You do have, Alexandre, Alexander, Alexandra, and not to mention like the Slavic countries even have their own pronunciation of Alexander. I don't know. I just find it fascinating at how that name has truly stuck.
Yeah, and that was topics I wanted to touch on in my like Lingua series. I haven't made any videos on that in a while, probably because it's just that series is very intensive in the amount of research you need to do, and I'm not a very excellent linguist, so it's been put on the wayside for a little bit. It probably will be put on the wayside for a little bit longer, but I do want to go back and talk more about this stuff because it's probably one of the most fascinating aspects.
Well, two things I need to say. One, you're more than welcome to use anything we've talked about today if you want to make a video off of it. But also, in addition to that, it just started raining rather heavily. It doesn't look like my mic's picking that up, but just in case it is, bear with us, dear listener.
No, on my side you're good. I don't know how it's going to come out in your audio, but you're fine on my end.
Beautiful. So, okay, my argument for the oldest meme. So, like I said, it should be an image or phrase that can be universally understood by and hopefully any culture. Doesn't necessarily have to be any culture, at least most. I've heard a couple very good arguments that maybe an arrowhead is a meme because it requires education to be taught, and it basically has the same meaning in terms of being something that supplies death. But the problem with that is that it's not really too associated with that 100%. Now we have arrows that tell you which way to go and things of that nature.
The arrowhead, I'd make an argument for because like an arrow obviously represents like flight. So I think you can boil it down to even saying like direction itself as like symbolism. So pointing, like since the arrowhead like implies motion, like being thrown from a bow's hook or whatever you would call it. I'm not into archery. Uh, it implies motion within itself, like death too. I can see that, but I feel like I don't know. I feel like it's well, if I say it's too abstract, then also like I get into the argument like, well, isn't a cross too abstract also to be a meme? So you're gonna run into like those arguments either way.
So I do think I have one that fits the niche a little bit better, even though it may not necessarily be older, depending on how you look at it. A handprint.
Oh,
A handprint as a deliberate act of art. Once I've mentioned this to people, they always bring up the standard, oh, well, footprints in the sand or footprints in the mud, that's a meme too. No. Humans have, for as long as we've had our minds, deliberately put handprints on things to imply that we were there. And I think it's uniquely human.
it is definitely uniquely human, I'd argue. But like I said, I'm not an biologist or anything like that, so I couldn't say if it's like a animal instinct to do that. But also because obviously like monkeys and things like understand ownership too, but I feel like a handprint also has the connotation of like representing ownership in a very human aspect too, like a representation of like time in which I existed and I can claim this because my print represents that I existed in this time.
Exactly. And to this day, people put their hands in concrete with a similar meaning as far as we can tell.
As far as we can tell, obviously like when you get into like the artistic aspect, there's a lot of arguments for like even back to even for cave paintings, but like even like hand is the most simplistic thing, yet there's still millions of arguments about, well, does this really represent to like primitive man what we thought it represents? Like people say like, oh, they believe they could do this because it represented like some magic to them or something like that. But even in like the most material aspects, I feel like it does represent ownership.
True. And I actually had never even looked at it that way. I had always looked at it as here is a symbol that a modern man and a man from any point in history could be taken into a completely natural environment. You know, something that was not at all crafted by man. And if they saw a painted handprint on something, that would instantly imply to them that there's a human nearby. Or at least was at some point.
Well, obviously, I feel like for like creation, like that's the most basic act of creation too, like you said, because it implies like uh, humanity was here, and obviously, like you can get into the argument too of that, like the footprint on the moon is a similar idea. Obviously, like you already mentioned it, like footprints sort of had a different connotation, but I feel like that's in the sort of same line of thought.
It really is, and I do have to say I'm kind of hard pressed to argue it that it's not. My problem with it is that we have evidence of footprints of creatures that were clearly not doing it for an artistic or meaningful intent. But is that necessary for a meme?
And that's the argument people have over it. Like, I'm not an academic, I'm not an authority on this. I'm interested in the topic, so I love to hear people talk about it, and that's why I'm glad I got to come on today to talk about this stuff with you because as I said, you're a very interesting guy, and I think you have a lot of opinions about stuff, and I've loved to just talk about it. And you've brought up a lot of arguments I didn't see in my comments, and I didn't think of myself.
Well, thank you very much. You know, it means a lot to me that you would take the time to be on this, you know, little podcast of mine.
No, I feel like you obviously like you're a pretty small channel right now, but I feel like you produce good content. Like I see you do a lot of out in the field stuff, which I can't really do because I live in a very sort of out there area, so I don't have the time. I'm not really around any big population centers. But I'm glad you reached out to me because I would have never found you if you hadn't emailed me.
And that's actually something I would like to talk with you about a little bit off the air. So until then, do you have anything you want to say to the audience?
Well, I mean, thanks for listening to this. Subscribe to Kreeger Cast because I've had a good time here today, and I hope maybe in like a few months I can come back and we can give it a second round.
And do go check out his channel as well. I'm really having a hard time not calling you Pseudonym.
No, please just please call me that. Oh, I was going to say, I want people to interpret my name however you will. It's spelled Pseudiom. So pseudonym, uh, pseudium, if you want to go about it that way.
And a link to his channel will be on this end card. I do have one final question, and I'm doing the same thing I did to potential history here. I'm forgetting the final question here. And there it goes. I'm blanking out on it. So thank you very much for joining me today. And until next time, dear listener, see you out there.